Middle East expert is outraged that a left-wing professor is putting thousands of ICE agents in danger. Chad Groening has more.
Recently, the Daily Caller reported that an adjunct professor at New York University has created a database containing the personal information of nearly 1,600 current Immigration and Customs Enforcement employees and spreading it to domestic terrorist groups like Antifa. The article states, quote, Sam Levigny, a far-left artist and game designer, is spreading personal information, such as where they live and their contact information known as doxing, of people who they consider Nazi or alt-right, which according to them includes ICE and the NSA. Brigitte Gabriel is founder and president of Act for America and the author of the soon-to-be-released book entitled Rise, in defense of Judeo-Christian values and freedom.
What we're seeing right now is our enemies. I call it the leftist Islamist coalition, because the leftists are so vicious right now that they are willing to do anything to kill and sabotage people who are entrusted to protect us, whether it's the police or ICE.
And Gabriel says concerned Americans need to demand that this professor be held accountable.
Professors like this have no place on American college campuses. Professors like this should be persona non grata in any place of education. Is this the type of professor or radicals we want educating our children? People need to call NYU.
Gabriel says behavior like this from an educator at one of the most prestigious universities in America cannot and should not be tolerated. I'm Chad Groening.
Plastic straws and utensils are out in Seattle. Anna Wells explains.
Seattle is the first major city in the country to ban restaurants from providing plastic straws, cocktail picks, or utensils to customers unless someone specifically asks for one. Then officials say they should be given compostable straws and utensils. Restaurants that do not comply with regulations could face a $250 fine. The National Park Service estimates 500 million straws are used by Americans every day. Anna Wells, Fox News.
American factories expanded at an unexpectedly fast pace in June, another sign of strength for U.S. industry. But U.S. manufacturing will have to contend in the coming months with uncertainty over trade and a strengthening dollar. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com, on Facebook and Twitter, and download the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
My name is Steve Anthony. I'm the Special Agent in Charge of the Cleveland FBI. I'd just like to echo what Vicki said and thank all the partners for being here today, and of course recognize those that were not able to make this on short notice. The reason the Joint Terrorism Task Force works is because all the people to my left and right, and we are forever grateful. We're here today to announce the arrest of Demetrius Nathaniel Pitts, also known as Abdur Rahim Rafiq. Pitts has been charged in a federal complaint with attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization. Pitts was placed into custody yesterday, Sunday, July 1st at approximately 10 a.m. by the Joint Terrorism Task Force agents and task force officers. The criminal complaint sets forth in detail the facts and circumstances of the investigation and also the attempted material support charge.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. That was an announcement from the FBI and law enforcement in Cleveland about a possible foiled terror attack scheduled for the 4th of July. And we have to be so just grateful to God that that actually happened, that they were able to foil that attack, and that they were able to do what absolutely has to be done in this case, which is what we expect from the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Welcome to the show, everybody. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. I'm Stacy Washington, host of Stacey on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. It's great to be with you. Happy Monday to you. And we're going into the holiday. We have a lot to be thankful for, 4th of July, and so much more. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, it's Second Amendment Day on Stacey on the Right. We're going to talk about a lot of Second Amendment issues, and we're also going to cover the hot button news of the day. Specifically, Jennifer Rubin putting out another clarion call, this time from the so-called mouth of a conservative. Who here thinks Jennifer Rubin is still a conservative? Like, if you still think that, oh my goodness, I have some swampland to sell you in my backyard. So we also are going to speak with Mark Walters. He's the host of Armed American Radio's Monster Show on Sunday nights and another program Monday through Fridays. Good friend of mine, Second Amendment world advocate. And he's going to come on and talk to us about the Supreme Court pick and what that means for gun freedom in America. And I know with liberals, they always say gun freedom. We have all the gun freedom we need. We need gun control. We do need gun control. We need Americans to have good control over the firearms they're allowed to own and operate under the Second Amendment. That's the only gun control we need. So we're going to talk to him first hour. Second hour, we're going to speak to another Mark W. Smith. He's going to join the show to talk about the Second Amendment as well. He has a new book out, so we're going to be really excited to share about that. So right now, I want to pivot back over to this rhetoric. And we saw this shooting last week by this individual who had a bone to pick with the newspaper there in Annapolis, Maryland. And so this was hardly something that can be attributed to rhetoric by President Trump. And I've had a couple of inquiries. What do I think about the president's language towards reporters? I understand he's fighting fire with fire and he's hitting back against a media that was, up until he became the nominee for the presidency, really very supportive of him. And so it was kind of a shock to him to realize that none of that was real, that they only liked him when he was on television because he wasn't a politician. And when he became a politician, they only liked him because they thought he would be the easiest one for Hillary to beat. And when he beat her, then they realized, oh my goodness, what have we done? We really have hated him all along, and now we have to show him. And his reaction to that has been to fight fire with fire. Now, I do believe that we're supposed to, adequately defend ourselves, especially from lies and all of that. But what's ended up happening is the rhetoric at the rallies and the things that have been said by the president are easily misconstrued to mean that he wants violence to be done to, reporters. And so in light of that, I wish that the president would use a little bit more of a measured tone at the rallies. We get the fake news that has been very effectively turned around to be a language that favors the president. But when he has the reporters, the members of the crowd turn around and kind of boo the press, it can be disconcerting. And I actually was here in St. Louis, actually St. Charles, when the president spoke here at an event, and there were a few hundred people in the room. The media was at the back, which is a standard procedure. So they're the furthest away from the president, but they have a cordoned off area where they can set up their cameras. And then with powerful cameras like they bring the real studio cameras with them, then they can zoom in and they can get the shot that they want of everyone who's on the stage. It also enables them to include the crowd in the shot or not include the crowd in the shot because the elevated platform is about 2.5 feet off the ground. And so when I was standing back there, I was actually still on the carpet, and they were on an elevated platform behind me. And it was all of the big names, CNN, NBC, CBS, the local affiliates, as well as the nationals. They had people from everywhere. And then, of course, tables set aside that were labeled that regular press or media, because I had a press credential to attend. I couldn't be in that area either because that was for the traveling White House press corps, who were ushered in and seated just before the president took the stage. And so this is my first time attending an event like this where the president was there as press. I've attended other events in St. Louis where the president has spoken to the group, but I'm usually in the crowd. This time, being back with them, when he said, and of course we have the fake news here, we have the media here, look at them. And this is a crowded room, and I'd say I knew maybe 70% of the people in that room. So out of the hundreds of people, it's in St. Louis, this is where we live. Most of the people there, a few had traveled in from Jeff City and Columbia, but the majority of the people who were in the room are St. Louisans, people from St. Charles, people from Jefferson County. So I recognized a lot of people. And when they turned around, there was just some low booing. There wasn't any name calling. No one, looked aggressive. But when they turned around and booed, it was the first time I ever experienced that, the only time I've ever experienced it, where I was lumped in with the fake news media. And one of my friends kind of pointed at me from the crowd, and she smiled, and I smiled back. And then I looked up at the raised area just behind me, and all of the reporters up there, their faces were understandably upset. And so I get, first of all, it's a very effective tactic by any public figure that when a group of people marginalizes you, lies about you, and tries to demonize you, that you turn that same tactic back on them. The only problem with that with the media is, as many people in the media who are the main tips of the spear who are regularly demonizing President Trump and lying about him, you know, in that particular instance, it wasn't just me. Jamie Allman, local radio host, Tim Jones, former Speaker of the Missouri House, everyone who had a media credential, anyone who was local media who was a conservative, we were also lumped in with those people who were getting called fake news. And so I could tell that they were visibly upset by being singled out and called fake news. I wasn't upset because I assumed the president wasn't talking about conservative media, because I've never lied about him or you know, tried to impugn his character. But it was still a very interesting moment. And so I understand what the president's doing. I think he's done a really effective job. But I also understand pivot points. And sometimes you have an opportunity when you've done something well to pivot on to the next thing, to move on to the next thing. Kind of like comedians don't use the same jokes forever. They eventually move on to the next round of new content. And I feel like marketing-wise, the president has effectively shown the American people just who spends the majority of their time advocating for the Democrats and who is arrayed against him in his fight to bring things back to normalcy here in this country. And it would be a great time for him to pivot away from kind of, you know, directing the people at his rallies and crowds to kind of boo the media. Not because some of them don't deserve it, not because it was wrong in and of itself, but because it's now being used as a tool to work against the president, and it detracts from the messaging. And for me, that's the big deal here. The president is actually doing some amazing things that we're not really paying attention to because of the protests and because of the, you know, thwarted terror attacks, because of so many other news items that keep coming in. And make no mistake about it, these rhetorical flubs that we keep saying, why are they saying that you shouldn't have a public space? I mean, put it this way. Loretta Lynch and Hillary Clinton should never be allowed to pump gas in public. They should never be allowed to walk in public without being made to feel terrible about their support of abortion. Now, yes, that's radio silence you're hearing there for a second. Let that sink into you. Imagine how long a Republican would have left in public life if they said or tweeted out something like that. But that's what the Democrats are saying about Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Kirstjen Nielsen, Pam Bondi, anyone who has anything to do with the Trump administration. It cannot be allowed to stand. It cannot be allowed to be the way that we deal with each other here in this country. And so we're in the third segment, I want to just preview, we're going to talk about Ocasio-Cortez and her beautiful backstory that she used to help propel herself into that election where she unseated an entrenched Democrat who was heir apparent to Nancy Pelosi. We're going to talk about how she is actually bringing the things from her home country that drove her family out of their home country in South America to the United States and trying to force it on us. Can you believe that? Instead of being grateful to be an American, she wants to turn us into socialists too, so we can fail like her home country did. So we're going to talk about that. But right now, you guys know Jennifer Rubin is a contributor over at MSNBC. She used to be a reliably conservative, I'd say like traditionally moderate establishment Republican, writer, pundit, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't agree with her 100% of the time, but she was someone who I could say, yeah, she's a Republican, kind of like a Colin Powell, but without the honorable military service. So she is on MSNBC and she's talking about Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and she's just off the chain. Like, I don't know what happened to her. Did they inject her with some liberal juice in the back and she's not just gotten over it? There's no antidote. There's no cure. But she sounds unhinged. This is number 7.
You have to do what is most effective. I don't think what's most effective is throwing Sarah Huckabee Sanders out of a restaurant. I wouldn't serve her either, frankly. But what's most successful is getting 1 million people on the street to protest. Yeah. So let's redirect all of that good pent-up energy to something that makes a difference. Let's get 1 million people to go to Maine or 1 million people to go to Alaska and start putting pressure on those senators. Yeah. So it's perfectly civil to do that. No one's telling them to be violent protesters. But we're not going to let these people go through life unscathed. Sarah Huckabee has no right to live a life of no fuss, no muss after lying to the press, after inciting against the press. These people should be made uncomfortable, and I think that's a life sentence, frankly.
And very, very quickly, just to give you the last word on this, Eric, on the press part,
yeah.
The Republicans know that the press won't do that.
Yeah.
They won't resist it at all.
So the other voices you heard there, it's Joanne Reed, who she's come through her scandal about, you know, having some more conservative views on her blog from decades ago and having that information exposed. And she's still on the air, and this is the kind of content that she's putting forward. And not only should Joanne Reed be ashamed of this, but really, you have to address whether or not you would watch a show like this. And I don't watch MSNBC. I just, you know, find the clips online and listen to the entire clip, and then I bring you what's relevant here on the show. But I'm not guilty of watching MSNBC nor the Joanne Reed's program. And the reason I say that is because Joanne Reed was raised in church. She herself is descended from immigrants from, I believe, Nigeria. They came here and they've made a beautiful life here in this country. And Joanne Reed knows good and well that it's not biblical to call for people to be publicly humiliated or vilified for their political beliefs. I mean, if we're not doing that to communists and socialists, then we're certainly not going to do it to people who are working for the current duly elected administration of the presidency. So, look, Joanne Reed's married. She has children. I mean, she lives a regular life, too. Joanne Reed is not some single socialite who just happened to fall into a television role. She has an everyday life that she works where when she's not on television once a week, she's taking her kids to and from school. She's picking them up from different events. She's pumping gas. She's shopping for groceries. And these are the things that all of us do on a regular basis, just normal, everyday stuff. But with her, she's using her platform to spread this message that Joanne Reed Jennifer Rubin just shared, that it's not okay for people that oppose her belief system to do that too. And so that has to be something that we all stand against in opposition. In fact, we should be praying not just for this type of thing to be seen for what it is, for the scales to be ripped off of people's eyes so they can see this is wrong, but also that we would be praying for unity so we could go back to a place where you could bump into someone who is the parent of a kid who your kid's friends with and not worry about their political beliefs, not worry about whether or not they're going to gather a mob together against you, but instead just talk about whatever next thing you have together with your kids. Talk about the weather. Talk about your upcoming vacation or the one you just took. Talk about your promotion or whatever. There has to be some civility left in this country. We have to demand that. And we have to pray about it as well. So when we get back, we're going to have Mark Walters, host of Armed American Radio, right after these important messages. Welcome back to the program, everybody. StaceyOnTheRight.com and at StaceyOnTheRight on Twitter and Instagram. Those are great channels for you to tune into when we're not live on the air. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome our next guest, who is a good friend of mine. He's my conference buddy. Whenever I see him out and about in the world, we hang out on his radio show. And so it's a pleasure to welcome him to our program for the first time. Mark Walters, host of Armed American Radio, Monster Broadcast on Sundays, and then his daily program on Salem Radio. Thanks so much for coming on today, Mark.
Stacey, how the heck are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I've got on my patriotic dress today because, you know, it's the week of the 4th, and I'm so excited. And I'm also excited to talk to you about this great new thing, the SCOTUS picks and the Second Amendment.
Oh, boy. Where do you want to start on this thing? I mean, there's so much to talk about, and the left is going so crazy. Where do you want to go from here?
Well, okay, so that's the point. They're going crazy and they're saying it's about Roe v. Wade, but they've spent the majority of the past 500 and some odd days that the president has been in office really railing against gun control or against the Second Amendment. They've been advocating for gun control. And so while they may be saying that it's Roe v. Wade that's in danger if he appoints yet another conservative pick from that list, really I think it's that they don't think they're going to be able to get the gun control enacted.
I don't know if you've seen the piece yet, but let's go back to the Heller decision in 2008, if we could, for just a second.
Sure,
okay?
Absolutely.
You know, Kennedy's always been seen as what? The swing vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the left is going crazy right now because they think two big issues that they think he's a traitor. I'll go there in just a second, for retiring and resigning when he did. But if you go back and you look at Heller, you ask the question, was Kennedy a swing vote? Kennedy wasn't a swing vote at the time. He voted his conscience on the Second Amendment. I don't think there was a swing vote at that time during the court. The makeup of the court during Heller is different than what it is today. But you look at the swing vote that we consider as conservatives that Kennedy is today, he swung far left on abortion, he swung far left on gay rights, etc. Well, the left now thinks that Kennedy's legacy is going to be the destruction of his own legacy. Think about that.
But he was always a Republican.
Syndrome is so bad right now.
It is. It's blinding them.
His own legacy is going to be the destruction of his own legacy. So it's fascinating watching the left melt down right now.
Well, it's fascinating, but these are, so they look, Mark, like it's like kind of unhinged and it's out of control. But the left is really good at their messaging. That's one of the things they're very, very good at. And when they realize one thing won't work, remember it was the Russia investigation. That was supposed to eliminate Trump. Now that that's not working, they have a new problem, which was given to them by someone they thought was their friend because of the very cases that you just named off. They thought that Anthony Kennedy was kind of one of them. They knew he called himself a Republican, but in the end, they figured he'd hold off. He's not that old. He could hold off until the end of the Trump presidency, or at least until they could get Trump impeached so that they could have a crack at replacing him with someone who was a liberal. But that's not going to happen. And Kennedy was a Republican. He is a Republican, and he really wanted to wait until a Republican was the president. So they're gonna now frame this around abortion. But I believe, honestly, my gut tells me that it was the gun control that they hoped to enact, that that's their true goal. That, yeah, they want to keep abortion legal, but their real moneymaker is the gun control protests and these kids traveling around on a bus tour, all of that.
And I agree with you 100%. And, you know, as you well know, Stacey, and we've discussed it many times, both on air and in private conversation, they have to do it under the radar, don't they? Yeah. They can't let everybody see what their true goals are unless they expose their agenda. And if they do that, America pushes back because Americans, even Americans that might not like guns, don't like somebody telling them that they can't have guns should they choose to have guns down the road. And that has a lot to do with part of the meltdown here. And I think you're absolutely correct when it comes to Kennedy. There's certainly that hidden agenda. Look, if you don't think the agenda is hidden right now, take a look at Nancy Pelosi, take a look at Chuck Schumer, who are, even while the Parkland kids are out running around on a national tour and getting tons of leftist media attention on 24-hour cable news, Pelosi and Schumer are very well aware that there's a midterm coming up in November, and they're silent on the issue because both of them know that there's never been a national election ever won on a gun control platform or agenda. If I'm wrong, and you can correct me on that, let me know. But I've yet been able to find it. So when it comes to the Second Amendment and Kennedy and the meltdown that we're seeing from the left right now, while you're right, the media is framing it now, and intentionally so, as the abortion issue, no question. the Second Amendment, I believe, was truly their underlying root cause, because they know that now Trump is going to be able to cement a solid 5-4 majority with no more swing nonsense. And guess what's really going to drive him crazy? He's going to get another pick, too.
I know, and that's the other thing, and thank you for bringing that up, Mark. So we're talking about there's an unhinged nature to their upset right now because they weren't expecting this, which I'm kind of surprised, because the rumors about Justice Kennedy retiring this year, I've seen at least, no joke, 10 emails about that, like 10 back channel emails from people who are in the know saying it's happening this year. His staffers in his office have kind of let fly that they feel like he's winding down, not because they're happy about it, but because it's just discussion. It's what people discuss when someone is his age. But he's not the only one. Ruth Bader Ginsburg may want to wait until 2020 to retire, but it's not in the cards for her because she barely stays awake during the yearly State of the Unions. I mean, anytime she's in public, she's falling asleep. And she's really elderly. And then there's also Clarence Thomas, who isn't as old as the other two, but he's married, he has children and grandchildren, and he's served on the court for a few decades now. So he could theoretically say, my legacy is complete. I'm moving on too. That's just unthinkable, unimaginable for the left to consider that Donald Trump, the one they hate more than they hate like green beans and, flat tires. They hate him so much that he would be the one to fill those seats.
Yeah, that's what's driving them absolutely crazy. And there's a couple of things I could really take away from what you just said, and I hope we have enough time to go there. Let me go back to the court for just a second before I go back to that unhinged left and the direction that they're going now. But when we talk about this 5-4 majority, and you talk about Ginsburg, what's happening here, the real dynamic in play is that the court, this pick does not shift the court to a 6-3 majority. It shifts the court to a more solid 5-4 on issues like guns, because Kennedy already voted in favor of Heller. So we have an idea where he would go, but we don't have any idea where he would go on any subsequent cases, referencing, for example, assault weapons ban, which, as you know, the court has refused to take any Second Amendment case of any substance over the last 10 years since Heller. We would have loved to have seen them take the Peruta case, fortunately, out in California. We would have loved to have seen them take the Wren case in Washington, D.C., were it not for the fact that we won that case. And that case was so solid of a win that liberal governors and senators around the country in states like Connecticut, New York, Illinois, and California begged Washington, D.C. not to push that case and seek cert at the Supreme Court because they knew it was a loser. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the gun controllers themselves know that their own gun control laws in their own gun-controlled states are built on a house of cards. They knew that decision would be lost from Washington, D.C. at SCOTUS. They knew SCOTUS would probably take it. Therefore, they begged them not to. The only way that these people can win on gun rights is by not having cases heard, and that's how they claim victory, all right? Now, back to the unhinged left. Oh, and one more thing, Ginsburg, by the way. I know she doesn't want to retire while Trump is in office, but I don't know that she's going to be able to make it through this term of his, plus his second term, and then Pence's 2 terms. I'm not sure she's going to be able. So at some point, she's going to have to go. Now, back to the unhinged left right now. I've never seen anything like this. This is going to be a bruising battle that's going to culminate in a victory for Trump in the fall. McConnell has already seen to that, regardless of what the Democrats say. Having said that, I'm not sure how much more the left is going to be able to take before they literally pop. We're already starting to see signs of violence from the left. We witnessed it in Portland this weekend, and I would love to get your opinion as a host myself and ask you on your own show how you think this is going to eventually play out, Stacey. It scares me.
Well, I mean, I see a couple of different avenues that it could go in. Obviously, no crystal ball, but you asked, and I actually have thought about this. One thing that happens is we have a national emergency of some sort, some kind of terror attack, something horrible happens, and, it's through whatever the avenue that it comes through, whether it's dereliction on the part of FBI or some, well-planned terror attack or terror plot, that at that point the nation would coalesce and kind of turn our attention to that international problem, and we would be unified in that way. But as we saw with 9/11, that doesn't last forever. And at some point, people break back off into their factions, but it would give us a cooling off period. The other thing that happens is the left really carries through with Michael Moore and Maxine Waters and, Jennifer Rubin, all of their suggestions to put their bodies on the line. Even Loretta Lynch saying people had to die for civil rights at one point in this country. You should be willing to die too. That kind of language tells me they're ready for armed revolution, insurrection. They want to do Venezuela here in America, which I don't think Americans on the whole are ready for, but the Antifa people are. They're already mixing it up. They were in a brawl this weekend with Trump supporters. They're primed and ready for that. If that happens, then you're going to see a lot of good, God-fearing Democrats, kind-hearted people who just happen to believe differently than you and I, are going to really turn their backs on the Democrats. They're going to really feel like, that kind of radical behavior belongs in third world countries, not America. And it's going to be devastating for the Democrats because they have not yet realized why they lost in 2016. And the third avenue is that we kind of limp along as we are now, where a lot of Americans are disgusted by this, but they can turn away from it. You can escape this, just don't watch news, just don't pay attention to news, and you can get away from it. And the president's doing really well in the economy, and so most people are out shopping and eating and saving and getting their vacations together and putting their kids in college, and so they can actually just say, you know what, politics stinks right now, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm hoping that the first two don't happen. I don't want to see us devolving into some third world pit. I mean, this is America. But it's weird. I mean, come on, Mark, when you look at New York and them electing an actual Democratic socialist over a regular Democrat, the Democrats are actually in trouble. And I think Nancy Pelosi knows it and Chuck Schumer knows it. I don't think they know what to do about it, but they have a real problem. They've kind of set up this path for themselves. They're now on it. And now that they're hurtling towards, the train tracks run out and you go over the cliff, now that they're getting close to that, they're like, wait, this isn't what we planned. Well, it kind of is. You dance with socialism, you get, Ocasio-Cortez. That's what you get.
Well, it's interesting to me. I talked to somebody who will go unnamed for the purposes of this conversation. I spoke with them yesterday about how that election result occurred in Queens, over the last few days. Here you've got a 28-year-old, as you say, a Democrat socialist, avowed Democrat socialist. And this individual happens to hail from Queens. And he said, most people there were asleep at the wheel before they even realized what happened. He's actually gone as far as predicting a Republican victory because of the Democrat socialist win in the primary. Now, I don't know that can happen in Queens, but it's been told to me that there are a lot of Trump Democrats in Queens who would support the candidate now that they know, the Republican candidate, now that we know that there's a socialist, an avowed socialist on the ticket. So it remains to be seen. I would like to see that happen. Don't know that it will. I enjoyed the conversation and, philosophizing about it a little bit. But when you have people like Dick Durbin yesterday seemingly supporting the destruction of an American law enforcement agency along our border that is doing God's work, as far as I'm concerned, relative to cleaning up the garbage. And when I say garbage, I'm talking criminal garbage in this country that is taking American lives in the form of illegal aliens, drunk driving, murders, whatever, robberies, MS-13. These people are putting their life on the line every single day, and you've now got Dick Durbin. And when Dick Durbin comes out and says something like that he agrees with that principle, which is what she ran on, that mainstreams that radical idea, which mainstreams that agenda, which seemingly to me, Stacey, mainstreams socialism in the form of the Democrat Party. I don't know how they run away from this at this stage of the game anymore.
Well, I mean, you said it. I can't disagree with you.
Embrace it and tell us you want to take our guns. Wouldn't you have more respect for that?
Well, they have. Yeah. They have had a few op-eds since, since the beginning of the year where people have said, you know what? Yeah, I've changed my mind. We do want to take your guns. I mean, they've morphed a lot on the Second Amendment and a number of these issues. Really, Mark, if you look at the areas where they used to be so much more moderated in their conversation, whether it's abortion, safe, legal, and rare, they're no longer believing that.
Right.
Second Amendment, we just want sensible gun control. Now they want confiscation of AR-15s and different types of magazines and the magical clips, the unicorn clips that they don't know what they are, but they know they need to take them all from us. And other things like they got their bump stop thing, which, I mean, who cared about that? But they have other things that they want that have to do with the Second Amendment that they don't talk about a lot, because if we would allow them to get rid of AR-15s, then they would say, well, you know what? There's a bunch of other guns that behave just like AR-15s, but they just don't look scary and they're made of wood. We need those too. And then they would end up with the handgun ban.
Let me interrupt you for just a second. That's a great point to ask this question to the listener. And listener, I want you to think about this for a second. Why has the shooting in Annapolis, Maryland, fallen off the radar?
Oh.
Why aren't they talking about it? Why don't you know any more about Santa Fe, Texas, than you know about Parkland? Parkland was saturation coverage. Hell, it's still saturation coverage for a large measure. The kids are still out touring the country. They got book deals after 30 days. Look, that kid didn't sit down and write a book. I've written 2 books, and you don't write a book in 30 days.
No, not even close.
Okay? You don't put together the marches they put together in 30 days without support from a ton of money and a ton of people who are inside and know how to put these things together. I worked with the individual that put together the Second Amendment March back in 2010. It took him a year and a half of his life to do it, to get the permits and everything else in place as an average Joe Blow. The fact of the matter is the shooting at Maryland and the shooting at Santa Fe, Texas don't fit the narrative. Why? Because they weren't AR-15s, Stacey.
Mm-hmm.
They're shotguns. Last night when I opened up my program, I opened it up with Joe Biden's words from a few years ago. Buy a shotgun. Buy a shotgun. You don't need an AR-15. Because, you see, if they can't come after the shotgun because they've been telling people they don't want to come after your shotgun.
Yeah.
So the media, lies of omission, just ignores it, doesn't talk about it anymore, and it goes right back to what you were talking about, the original question about what they want to do with the Second Amendment and Kennedy. And again, it's silence.
It
because
is.
they can't come out and tell you what they really want to do lest they expose their own hypocrisy and their true agenda, which they know America will never, ever go for. These are devious, evil people. They know exactly what they're doing. And, boy, I tell you, you got to be smarter than them, and you got to stay a step ahead of them.
Which is what we do when we have you on the program. I'm hoping I can get you back more often. Thank you so much for your time today. It's Mark Walters, host of Armed American Radio, and so many other fantastic things. Mark, I'll talk to you again shortly.
Thank you, Stacey.
All right. Have a great day. We'll be back with more right here on Stacey on the Right. Keep it here.
Out of all the people in the world, we've all done or will do the following: be birthed into this earth, grow, go to school, maybe go to college, get married, have kids, grow old, and die.
You have called for a number of things, one of them being to abolish ICE. And you recently traveled to the border to Tornillo, Texas, to see the shelters, to see where some of these separated families are being held. What would you replace ICE with? And do we not need protection at the border?
Well, we absolutely do need to make sure that our borders are secure, to make sure that people are safe in passage. But what we need to realize and remember is that ICE was established in 2003, right at the same time as the Patriot Act, the AUMF, the Iraq War. And we look back at a lot of that time and legislation as a mistake now. And I think that ICE is right there as a part of it. It has its extrajudicial nature is baked into the structure of the agency, and that is why they're able to get away with black sites at our border, with the separation of children. We are committing human rights abuses on this border and separating children from their families, and that is the structure of the agency. We can replace it, and we can replace it with a humane agency that is directed towards safe passage instead of the direction of the criminal.
So that's my introduction to you to this this young woman, Ocasio-Cortez. She's a child of immigrants. Her mother, she says, scrubbed toilets her entire childhood to enable her to have the life where she could go to Boston College. And I'm excited about that. But I have a couple things that I think we need to say right now. She's not the only person in America whose parents worked, a working class job to enable her to take part in the American dream. Many, many, many families have that history, if not their parents and their grandparents or their great-grandparents. That's why we all love America, because you can come here and scrub toilets and your child can go to Congress. Your child can be in a Hollywood movie. Your child can start a company that eventually ends up being the largest of its kind and international. You can come to this country yourself as an immigrant and have that same kind of result where you are elected to office or you start a company yourself. That's why people come here. What you shouldn't do is come to America and try to change it into a socialist country. But what is socialism? You're probably thinking, oh, I know what it is. Well, you know who doesn't know what socialism is? A bunch of Democrats. So let's roll back in time for a quick second and go back to Chris Matthews. A few years ago, he had some fun with some different candidates. It was Hillary Clinton and some others. He kept asking them, what is the difference between a democratic socialist and a Democrat? What's a socialist? Do we know? He was asking them that because Bernie Sanders was running on the Democratic ticket in the primary against Hillary Clinton as a democratic socialist. And he found that so amusing that he decided to ask them about it. It's number 4.
What is the difference between a Democrat and a socialist? What's the difference between a socialist and a Democrat? What's the difference between a socialist and a Democrat?
More
socialist like Bernie Sanders.
What's the difference between being a Democrat and being a Republican?
Well,
you have to ask.
Well, see, I'm asking you.
It depends how you define each one, doesn't it?
You're chairman of the Democratic Party. Tell me the difference between you and a socialist. I wouldn't like somebody calling me a socialist.
But I'm not one.
Oh, you do it.
Well, I'm not going to get into it.
The relevant debate that we'll be having is what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican?
I think there's a huge difference.
I am a progressive Democrat. I'm a progressive Democrat.
How's that different than a socialist? Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chair of the Democratic Party, won't answer my question. Hillary Rodham, you guys are well schooled. Would it be helpful to change the name of the Democratic Party to the Social Democratic Party? Would that help improve the definition for everybody?
I think we're happy with our present name.
Whoa! Unbelievable.
So do you hear what's happening there? He's asking party leadership if they know what socialism is, because he's thinking to himself, as many of us did at the time, why are the Democrats dancing with the devil? Why would they allow someone who is a socialist, who only caucuses with them, to run on their side for president? Why didn't they say, I'm sorry, but our party is for Democrats. So while we love you to caucus with us and we love you to vote with us and we love your progressivism, we will not allow you to run on the Democratic ticket because you are a socialist. Had they only made that one delineation, they wouldn't be in the position right now of having their heir apparent unseated by this 28-year-old woman who is literally trying to bring Venezuelan, they're eating their zoo animals, they're eating cats and dogs. They have to pay for water now. The military has taken over their water supply. Venezuela is a collapsed, failed state. They've lost almost 500,000 of their citizens, have moved out of the country to parts unknown, probably a bunch of them living here. And they're doing that because socialism has failed there. It hasn't just failed. Their entire country is literally just a smoking dumpster fire. Yet we have this woman, and who's going to ask her? Like, I definitely will try to get her on the show, you guys, but who's going to ask her why she thinks socialism will work here when it hasn't worked in Venezuela or Mexico or any of those other South American countries? Why is she trying to put a failed system in place here in America where we've already got it going on and we don't need her help? Thank you. What is the reason that she would feel like coming to our good old red, white, and blue? Hey, we got problems. Hey, we have Detroit and other inner cities that look like third world countries. Sure, it's not perfect here. We have a lot of things in our past that you can look down your nose on us because we had slavery at one point. I'm descended from slaves. But guess what? We fought a war and shed blood over that issue and came out of it one nation still. And to this day, Americans are living side by side, working side by side, and dying side by side to defend the Constitution of the United States. Blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, immigrants, natural borns, you name it, all putting on their BDUs, their fatigues, their dress blues, their flight suits, their, land taking apparatus, land and sea apparatus, all the different uniforms of our armed services. We have every single one of them integrated and full of people who love this country, regardless of their ethnic background. And so, look down your nose all you want. But we're still doing what Americans have done since the founding, which is forming a more perfect union. And that statement in and of itself infers that the union is not perfect. And it never will be as long as there are people in it. But I find it very insulting that this woman has immigrated to this country, taken advantage of our fantastic educational options as a child, gone to college, and now to reward us for allowing her into our good society, she wants to force socialism on Americans. I think it's the height of ignorance and of entitlement and of someone who, quite honestly, she doesn't want to dance with the one who brought her. She does not care about America the way the rest of us do. As flawed as it is, I don't want any other system of government because this is the experiment that even Chinese people who are in the aristocracy over there in their country, because they're communists, so the only people who really live well are those who are in the elite. Even their elites understand that the ultimate in citizenship, the ultimate birth certificate to have is one with American citizenship. They come over here and they pay $50,000 to $70,000 to stay in a hotel. They come over when they're 8 or 9 months pregnant. They spend the last month of their pregnancy shopping and taking advantage of all the fun things in California. Then they go to a really posh private hospital and give birth so they can get a birth certificate for their child that gives them American citizenship because they were born on American soil. And then after the baby is old enough to fly, they fly back home to China. And their child can come here and get an American education. Usually they bring them back so that they can do some, get their higher education, college, so they can be educated in America's colleges. Now you tell me, are they doing that to get German citizenship? Are they doing that to get British citizenship? Nope. They want American citizenship. And look at all the different ways people are going about getting American citizenship by hook or by crook. And the people who can't get the citizenship just decide, what's good enough for me? Living in America, working in America. I'll just go there and live and work. And I'll just have my kids there and my kids will be American citizens. And their system of government is so bogged down and overwrought and slow moving that by the time they figure out I've been there illegally, I'll have been there for decades. My kids will be grown-ups. And if nothing else, my kids will be Americans. These are the kind of gambles that people are making, which is why you see the polls. Now there's more than one of people who've been asked, whose fault is it that there's a big immigration separation thing going on at our border? And Americans are saying it's the fault of the parents. The parents are bringing these kids here because in their minds, even if they're separated and they don't get their kids back and they're deported, which that's not what's happening. The kids they're being deported with their parents. But remember, only a couple thousand of them come in with parents or family members. The rest of the kids who are coming in unaccompanied, they're not deported because they're coming in and they're getting dispersed around the country. So we don't have a mechanism for turning people around at the border. And so they're taking advantage of that. And the further into this issue we get and the more information comes out about how our government has literally been hamstringed, they have their hands tied behind their back, their mouths are taped shut, and they're supposed to do the job of protecting our border. The more information comes out about that, the more people will come here and try to get access to the country. They're going to come because they know they can't be turned away, they can't be sent off. And if the Democrats get their way and force the Trump administration into doing catch and release like the Obama administration did, we're going to see an explosion at the border that's going to be the equivalent of, basically an overrunning of the country. Why wouldn't you come here? If your prospect is eating zoo animals or pets and paying for water, or making a couple 1,000-mile trek and finally making it into America where you can get a job within 24 hours working in the garment district in New York or almost anywhere in the country, you can get a job because you're willing to work for $5 an hour, no benefits. Why wouldn't you come here? And that's what we have to fix. So, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take more than just, obviously we did our best. We elected Donald Trump, and he is really strong on this issue. And he's not given in to the whims of the Democrats and a lot of pro-illegal immigration Republicans in this area. And this is not me saying that Donald Trump is perfect or that he's like the best guy in the world, but he's the best guy for this job because anybody else would have already folded by now. The pressure is enormous. So as we're going into, and we have a show tomorrow, live program for you, and we have great guests planned for you. But as we're going into the 4th of July, and if you're anything like us, you're buying fireworks and you're planning on having a really good time on the 4th. And I know we are here at our house. And that's why I have on my 4th of July outfit, guys. I have on the little hat. See how it's almost like a bobblehead hat? And the little crazy Martian, what are they called? It's a headband. Got on my 4th of July headband, my red, white, and blue dress. And I'm loving it. I love celebrating the 4th of July, the independence from Great Britain and us self-governing ourselves. I love it. I absolutely love it. Me having a permanent tan doesn't prevent me from loving that. But we have some systemic issues. And the root of it is that we don't know our history. We don't know about the founding of this country. We don't understand what it took to get us the Constitution that we have. And as long as we are a country, we're going to be changing and kind of saying, is this still viable? But a discussion about the viability of the Constitution, different government agencies, all of that has to come from a place where you have a knowledge base of why we have the government that we have. And for people that don't have that knowledge base, they really can't be in the discussion. And I want to point out something else. And I just want to say thanks one more time to Mark Walters, host of Armed American Radio. Such a fantastic guy. Thanks for him coming on today. It was really great. I got to say, he made the point about Antifa, and there's some video going around, I think, where some guy, I guess he got just like, he got straight up knocked out at a protest this weekend where Antifa members were confronting some people who actually had a permit to do a protest. And the Antifa members showed up, and I've seen this before. We had a protest march here in St. Charles, and Antifa didn't have a permit, but they showed up in a group, and the police allowed them to stand across the street, and they yelled taunts and things at us, and we used our bullhorns and addressed them. But mainly, we weren't there for a counter protest. We were there for it was basically a certain area of St. Charles that we were allowed to march around with our signs and everything for our actual protest that was permitted. And at that time, when Antifa showed up, they had a very tiny group. What was so interesting about it is that they were all really short. Like they were short in stature, meaning they were all like between 5'4" and 5'8". The women were tiny. The guys were really short. And they all had on these like tan outfits, like those little socialist Raul Castro type get-ups. And then they also had masks over their faces. And it was They weren't masks, they were bandanas. They all had black bandanas or white bandanas wrapped around their faces. And so I asked, I was like, why are we over here protesting? We have our faces out and you guys are covered up. And they said they were covered up because they didn't want to be harassed at work or to be fired or to have their homes and lives threatened by people like us. And I said, well, people like us don't threaten people's like you's lives. Why would we? We don't care if you're living or where you work. We don't care about that. We didn't even know you guys were coming. And they're like, yeah, but that's happened to us before. I'm like, well, by who? And they couldn't answer. They really want to keep their anonymity because it gives them kind of it's like a license to then hit and be violent. All right. Hour 2's up next. Keep it here and happy 4th of July.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Vice President Mike Pence called the Values Voter Summit the greatest gathering of conservative, pro-family Americans in the nation. The Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. is September 21st through the 23rd. Sponsored in part by AFA Action, the summit will encourage and equip you to preserve America's republic. Learn more and register at valuesvotersummit.org. That's valuesvotersummit.org.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. The police chief in Boise, Idaho, says the most gravely injured in a mass stabbing at a 3-year-old's birthday party are still clinging to life. Saturday night's attack happened at an apartment complex that's home to refugee families from around the world. 9 people were injured, including the birthday girl and 5 other children ages 4 to 12 years old. The attacker has been arrested. President Trump sat down with Fox's Maria Bartiromo during Fox's Sunday Morning Futures. They talked about a variety of topics. President Trump responds about North Korea's denuclearization.
I made a deal with him. I shook hands with him. I really believe he means it. Now, is it possible? Have I been in deals? Have you been in things where people didn't work out? It's possible.
President Trump is also expected to meet face-to-face with President Putin July 16th. And many people are wondering if Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will make an unannounced trip to North Korea. The Board of Trustees of a major Northeastern university saw the wisdom of repealing an egregious speech policy rather than being taken to court in a case they were certain to lose. Bob Kellogg explains.
Young Americans for Liberty at the University of Massachusetts Amherst wanted to hold a rally for free speech, but Caleb Dalton of Alliance Defending Freedom says the group discovered the school's policy regarding speeches and rallies was too prohibitive.
The policy at UMass told them that they could only engage in a speech or a rally on campus during 1 hour per day in that small, tiny speech zone.
He says it's to YAL's credit that they were willing to sue the school with Alliance Defending Freedom's help.
And it shouldn't have taken a lawsuit to accomplish this change. UMass has been on notice with demand letters and op-eds that have been written about this policy for years, and they've refused to change it until these brave students from Young Americans for Liberty stood up and challenged this policy.
Dalton says ADF and the students will continue to monitor the school to make sure another unconstitutional speech policy is not put in later. I'm Bob Kellogg.
The world's largest audio Bible ministry is celebrating a significant milestone that was recently reached.
Faith Comes by Hearing has seen the distribution of its 1 millionth military Bible stick. Those in the military have been benefiting from the content in this digital audio player since 2008. It comes preloaded with a dramatized recording of the New Testament and specially selected psalms. Program Director Bill Lohr admits that when they first started it, they didn't think it was going to be a large outreach, but the Lord had other plans.
It really ramped into something that we had no idea whatsoever. It really was a God thing in the sense that he saw this need and he knew that it was going to have to happen. We were not prepared for it, but it has turned into 12,000, 15,000 a month that are still going out. And it's been a decade now.
Lord tells AFN the ministry views the military as a people group outreach.
It's a very specific culture that they live in, high stresses, and we want to make sure they have God's word. They're making decisions that are life and death decisions. They need to have the way, the truth, the life in their ears and their hearts.
Lord states that their goal is to ensure that no service member or veteran who wants a free Bible stick is overlooked. I'm Bill Bumpus.
Sweltering weather will stick around for most of the country this holiday week. Janice Dean has a look at the forecast.
While the heat across the Midwest eases today, hot and humid conditions remain in place to start the week over the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. Temperatures on Tuesday into the midweek across the east will lower by a few degrees, but will remain hot. A few storms will move across the plains and upper Midwest today, and wildfire conditions return to critical levels over the Intermountain West as low humidity and warm conditions increase the wildfire potential. I'm Janice Dean, Fox News.
Global markets fell today as weaker than expected Asian economic surveys made traders anticipate the effects of higher tariffs set to be imposed by the world's two largest economies on each other starting Friday. Benchmark U.S. crude oil fell below $74 a barrel. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com and on the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
The announced retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy this week helped make one political reality clear. Despite his overall unpopularity, President Trump is winning, and the Democrats right now are reeling. The Supreme Court. Mr. Trump is about to shape the court for a generation by choosing a possible tie-breaking conservative justice, and he's already filled the lower courts with like-minded conservatives. How about the Republican Party? The president's approval rating among Republicans is around 90%. Elected Republicans fear criticizing him, and the party has become a cult of personality, his. How about fake news? Mr. Trump has turned that phrase, which initially referred to the phony Russian-generated stories designed to support his campaign in 2016, into an applause line now to discredit responsible reporting showcasing his misdeeds. How about credibility? If reporters faithfully fact-check the president's serial misstatements, they risk being considered biased. If they don't, the misstatements gain traction. Either way, Mr. Trump wins. The Mueller investigation. The president has succeeded in convincing millions that the investigation is biased, despite trafficking only in innuendo and not providing evidence. Then there's the economy. It is doing well, but it was doing well before he took office. Yet with unemployment down and jobs being created, President Trump is getting this credit. Still, much of Mr. Trump's success is superficial. While he's more popular among Republicans, the pool is shrinking. His trade war, North Korea, or the Mueller investigation all could turn against him, and frankly could turn against him now like North Korea has. But if the Democrats' reaction this week to the Kennedy retirement proved anything, it's that the Democratic Party has not figured out how to succeed in the Trump era.
So welcome back to the show. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk, urbanfamilytalk.com. And don't forget to sign up for our conference. It's coming up in August. I really hope to see a bunch of you there, just so I can shake your hand, so we can talk about marriage and family and really celebrate all of the things that we're doing at Urban Family Talk, division of and ministry of American Family Radio. So what do we have for you this hour? Well, that was an interesting bit of audio by Chuck Todd talking about, he loves to do these kind of assessments of President Trump where he'll give him a couple of backhanded compliments. The economy is doing well, but it was doing well before he took office. Was it doing well like this? I think we've seen record improvement in the economy. And it would be great if Chuck Todd could just say he's made some really great strides with his tax reform package and cutting of regulations, but he won't. So he's talking about not just Trump is winning while the Democrats are reeling. He says the Republican Party is shrinking. okay, if we give him the Republican Party is shrinking, which I'm not so sure I'd say it's shrinking rather than it's changing, because you have a bunch of people who don't like President Trump. They are calling themselves Republicans, but they really were Democrats all along. They just got to be more sensible, more respectable under the cover of being Republicans, and now they've been outed. They're the same viewpoints as Democrats, and now they have to kind of cordon themselves off because they can't stand to be affiliated with a party that really just wants to be left alone and given the opportunity to worship God and be free of government. They said they did, but honestly, is anybody still thinking Jennifer Rubin is a Republican? Come on. So he's never talks about the shrinking of the Democrats. There's a movement on Twitter. It's called #WalkAway. It started by this guy who did this video about how he was basically threatened with doxing if he didn't toe the line on some Democratic issues. He was threatened with doxing by his friends. And so he said, you know what? You guys aren't really my friends, and this isn't the way I want to live. If I disagree with someone, I shouldn't have to be worried about my personal information being sent out. So he started the #WalkAway, shot a video, put some music to it, and it's gone viral. And so many other Democrats have tweeted out the same thing. They're walking away from the Democratic Party. Now, are they becoming Republicans? No. No, they're not. But they're walking away from the Democrats because the Democrats have walked away from them on so many issues. Gay marriage. Some of them, and admittedly, a bunch of the people on the walkaway hashtag are openly homosexual, but they're walking away because they don't condone the violence. They don't condone the rhetoric. They don't condone trying to undo a duly elected president. They may not like Donald Trump on all of the issues, but some of them are actually turning into Trump supporters because of the way the Democrats are opposing this presidency. It's like we're in a perpetual election. We can't seem to get out of election mode. Now, I'm going to talk about 2018's midterms. I'm talking about relitigating the election of the president of the United States. I didn't like it when some Republicans attempted to do it after Barack Obama was elected. Well, he's not my president. I thought to myself, well, whose president is he then? How can he not be your president if you're a citizen of the United States? He's the president of the United States. I was not an Obama fan, but he was still the president of the United States. And had I been on active duty, he would have been my commander-in-chief. That's how that thing works. So while you may feel like, oh my goodness, we've given the government over to a bunch of nincompoops, they're your nincompoops because they were duly elected. You got to put up with them until the next election, and you should be motivated, as the Republicans were in the midterms. Remember, we're the ones who gave Barack Obama the shellacking in both midterms. But it wasn't enough to not have him come back for a second term. And that's something else that the Democrats are grappling with right now. As unpopular as Barack Obama was with half of the country, he was still reelected. Now, part of that was the Republicans' fault. We ran John McCain. Come on. What were we thinking the first time? Second time, we ran Mitt Romney. What were we thinking? Hey, if you don't run a candidate that people can get excited about, you stand the opportunity to lose. And that's what happened. And so now we're looking at 2020. And when I say we, let me correct that. The Democrats are looking at 2020, and it's looking kind of bleak because they've got hardcore, dyed-in-the-wool socialist Bernie Sanders, who will still be alive at that point because only the good die young. And I'm not saying I want him to die. I'm just saying. He'll be around. He'll be thinking of cranking up another run. That they don't have the apparatus anymore with which to stop him. Not only will he be there, but other Democratic socialists have been empowered by Bernie Sanders' success. So instead of running hardcore progressive liberals, they're going to be looking at running socialists who they don't agree with. They don't agree with open socialism, not the older Democrats. Do you know why? Because those older Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, all those guys, Chuck Schumer, Harry Reid before he retired, they were educated in American schools before American schools were taken over by the NEA and run into the ground. They still remember the lessons they learned as children about socialism progressing to communism and communism killing hundreds of millions of people last century. They still have that information stored in their memory banks, and they have a natural revulsion to open socialism. Now, they're fine with dancing with it a little bit. They're fine with taking it out to dinner, sending it some furtive text messages, keeping the lines of communication open, having a relationship back channel. They're fine with that. But they don't want to be running around with people who call themselves openly Democratic Socialists. They don't know what to do with this Ocasio-Cortez. They don't know what to do with her. And she is clearly not who she says she is. I mean, so she says that as a kid, she grew up in the Bronx. But it turns out when she was 2, her parents moved. And by the time she was 5 in school age, they were living in a much nicer neighborhood, not the Bronx. Now, she moved back to the Bronx after she graduated from high school, went to college in Boston, came back. She moved back to the Bronx. She definitely has friends there. She has roots there. But she wasn't raised in the Bronx. She has presented herself as this hard scrabble case when the reality is she's the poster child for the American dream. Your parents work hard and they bust it. And all they tell you is, we want better for you. Study, go to college, you're going to make it. And so she does. I mean, it's really that simple. She does. And now she's successful. And instead of her saying, this is where this happened for me. It didn't happen in Venezuela or Mexico. It didn't happen in Portugal. It happened here in America. And what I believe is that while I disagree with, border enforcement, or I believe in open borders, or whatever the case might be, I can't turn my back on a system that gave me the opportunity to speak English and have ownership in the American flag and be a permanent part of the fabric of America. Why doesn't she have to say that? Because the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, all of these ones, Maxine Waters, they're the ones that told minority Americans, you're not really Americans. You're African Americans. You're Italian Americans. You're Mexican Americans. They're the ones who told young people in America, America's really a horrible place. It's a horrible place for women. It's a horrible place for blacks. Knowing good and well the best place to be an American, to be a black person, an Asian person, the best place to be a woman is America. They taught these kids decade after decade after decade. And now these same kids they taught this garbage to are coming out and they're like, I'm sorry, Nancy, but you're just not radical enough for me. Who do you think is leading the charge against having her be the next speaker? They hope to take Congress back in the fall, and they don't want Nancy Pelosi to hold the gavel. She says, I'm a woman. I'm a progressive. She was just confronted about this over the weekend. Why are people saying you shouldn't be the speaker anymore? She's like, I don't know. I'm progressive. I'm a woman. And I'm the speaker now. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're not. You're not going to do it. You're not radical enough for us. You're running around saying that we shouldn't run people out of the public spaces. We don't want that America you're thinking about. We want a new America that looks a lot like Mexico. So do you see the problem that the Democrats have now painted themselves into? They can't get out. They can't escape it. So they either have to splinter off, and this is what's so funny is they always accuse the Republicans of the things that they're guilty of. They say that Donald Trump has split the Republican Party and that we're going to go the way of the Whigs. The Republicans are going to, anybody who's a clear thinking person is going to leave Donald Trump's Republican Party and create their own, and that's going to permanently damage the prospects of the Republicans for the foreseeable future. That's not what's happening. People who don't support President Trump are being marginalized because he has an agenda that's pro-America, pro-growth, pro-Constitution, and anyone who's not for that isn't getting elected. So even though Chuck Todd wants to tell his huge audience that it's a cult of Trump, it's a cult of, no, it's not. It's that people are single-minded in supporting him because we understand what he's trying to do. You know what Chuck Todd should be talking about on his show? I know, but I'm still going to say it. He should be talking about how Chinese venture capitalist firms that are owned by the Chinese government are operating within the United States and have been for over 10 years. And those firms offer venture capitalist startup money to firms in Silicon Valley that are doing the work of putting together artificial intelligence capabilities, advancing the work in the AI field, venture capitalist companies that are advancing the work on drones. Who doesn't have a drone? We have two. We have one that's like a little... it looks like a TIE fighter. It's a Star Wars drone. And you can fly it around with this little remote control thing. And it's really cool. It not only hovers, it goes up and down. And once you fully learn how to work it, you can fly it around outside. I mean, it's so cool. We have another little teensy-weensy drone that has a camera in it that you can fly around. So the actual the technology it's so multifaceted. Not only can you use drones to deliver packages to people and to surveil people, but drones are now currently in use, as we all know, waging war in the Middle East. So guys who are in air-conditioned spaces in Nevada, who are active duty service members, are waging war in another country using drones. And they're killing people. I mean, it's like not even a big deal. So China doesn't have the kind of brain power that we have. They don't have our American universities. They don't have our education system. And they don't have the kind of freedom that we have here, because freedom breeds creativity. You don't get iPhones and the internet out of a country that's communist, where you can only have one kid and then they forcibly sterilize you and force you to have abortions if you haven't been sterilized. You don't get creativity in countries like that. Communism doesn't breed creativity. So what they do is they're like the Borg. Do you guys, okay, if you don't watch Star Wars or Star Trek, if you don't watch Star Trek, you're not going to get this reference, but that's exactly what the Chinese are behaving like. They can't create the technology on their own, and they don't want to take the time to naturally begin with their industrial revolution and advance forward to a place where they have their own Chinese citizens creating the kind of technology that we have today. So what they're doing is they send a bunch of them over here. They're dyed-in-the-wool communists, and they work for the government. They start a venture capitalist firm, and they go in and they infuse these venture startups with these brainy little, genius American kids. And then in exchange for the venture capital firm, the money, they get the technology. They get access to the creative development. So they can jump ahead, because they're behind us by like 50 years on some of this stuff. Trump is trying to stop it. The Democrats don't want him to, because they'd rather we sell it all away than keep it here for ourselves and maintain our superiority. That's what Chuck Todd should be talking about. We'll be back with more right after this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We only go to the Holy Land once a year, and that's in March. Last year, we filled up several months in advance. So if you want to go in March of 2019, it's time to look at the details. You can get a brochure from us at 800-FAMILIES, 1-800-FAMILIES, option 5, and leave us your name and your telephone number, or go to twholyland.com, twholyland.com. It's going to be a wonderful time in Israel. We'll go to the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the holy city of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Masada, the Dead Sea, and on the list goes. If you'd like to go with us in March of 2019, all the information is available at twholyland.com. Order a brochure by calling 800-FAMILIES, option 5.
Up next, Carol Swain with 2 minutes to think about it. From poverty to professor, from GED to PhD, a bold Christian speaking truth to power. Here's Carol with today's 2 minutes.
Hello, folks. Luke 9:25 says, "What would it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul?" Recently, we've seen two very high-profile celebrity suicides. Suicide has become one of the leading causes of death in America. Those suicides of fashion designer Kate Spade and chef and TV host Anthony Bourdain came as a shock, because our first reaction is to say things like, they were so successful. They had everything. Our society has so linked people's value to either what they do or what they have. I'm not sure if that idea came from an ad agency or what, but it's wrong. It's the wrong answer. If you're suffering from depression, it matters not how rich or successful you are in your career. In fact, the rich and successful can be more at risk of suicide from depression or other mental illness because they have access to any and all sorts of self-medication, thinking the booze, drugs, or stuff will fill the holes being drained by depression and suicidal urges. Christians know that a hole in one's life that size can only be filled by the saving grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Self-medicating never works. Whether you're in the church or outside of the church, get help now because your life is worth it.
To learn more about Carol and the Carol Swain Foundation, visit carolmswain.net and make sure you follow her on Facebook at Professor Carol M. Swain and on Twitter at Carol M. Swain.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. Happy 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. Happy America's birthday, if you will. I encourage you to take a few minutes to kind of look into just what our founders had to go through back before there was air conditioning, back before there was really the conveniences that we have now, the way we complain. I know I'm speaking from my own heart here, y'all. The way I complain when it's 100 degrees outside, the way I behave when it just gets to be too much. Over the weekend, I was like, oh, I had all this stuff to go do. And it was an effective temperature here in St. Louis, 110. It was 100, but it was 110. And I just was like unable to cope. I had my iced tea, you know, with the mango flavoring, and I was sipping that, and I had a mint every now and again, and I would go from place to place, and just a short, 100 feet walk from the parking lot to the next spot, and I felt like I was going to pass out. So imagine the founding fathers who had really made themselves enemy of the most powerful nation on the planet, Great Britain, by declaring independence from them and the war and all of that. When they sat down to actually decide what kind of government we were going to have, they didn't want to have to be governed by a monarchy. But they knew that it wasn't going to be easy to create a system of government that worked where people were self-governed because that had never been done before. So they decided to take a roll of the dice on the Constitution, self-governance, a representative republic. And when you think about how horrible it just was, dissension, and everybody had their own competing interests, and yet they came together on it. They prayed about it and then made the Constitution that we have, which has been amended and will probably be amended again. But they did all of that in 100-degree temps, and they had on 3 shirts and a jacket. Back in the day, you had to wear like 1,000 pieces of clothing every day, and those weird shoes and socks and everything up to the knee. And they did all of that and came up with a very imperfect compromise in order to start our country. And here we are, not from outside. It's not China or Russia or Iran that is destroying our Constitution and ripping apart the threads of this country. It's us. We're doing it because we have a bunch of people in this country who are so ignorant of what the founding was really about that they're literally ripping apart the best thing that's ever happened when it comes to a country and self-rule that's ever existed in the history of people getting together and having countries. So this week, it's a great week for us to stop and take a minute to listen to a podcast, pick up a book, and I'll have some resources for you. Last segment, I'll give you a list of things that would be great for you to read or listen to on Audible. If you want a Constitution 101 class over at Hillsdale is also really excellent, and it's free. We'll get into that a little bit more. But right now, I'm so glad that we're able to speak with Mark W. Smith. He's a constitutional lawyer, author of Duped, How Anti-Gunners Are Taking Your Freedom. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Stacy.
Okay. So,
and happy 4th of July week to you.
Yes, I know. I love the holidays. I have on my little weird headband and a little like sequined hat that's red, white, and blue. A red, white, and blue dress. I'm ready. I'm ready for this week.
It's interesting how it used to be you'd want 4th of July to fall on like a Friday or on a Monday, so you have like a 3-day week. And guess what? Now we have like a whole week to celebrate.
Yeah, I love that. I know a lot of people are working, but what we normally do is, the 4th is coming, so you either celebrate it the weekend before or the week after if it's the middle of the week like this time. But you can also just be, incorporating the celebratory aspects into your everyday as you're going to work, which is what I'm doing all this week. I'm like, this is the way it should be. We should be very happy to have our country pass yet another birthday, that we're still together, even though we're fighting like cats and dogs, that we're still able to be a country.
That's right, and that's what the Founding Fathers wanted, right? The framers basically wanted a celebration every 4th of July. So this is what it's supposed to be about, celebrating the existence of the United States and how we were able to overcome, as you mentioned in your intro, the greatest military might that had ever existed in the history of the world as of that time. And yet these people stood up and managed to win their freedom and did something positive with it.
All right, so let's talk about, and I so agree with you, but I want to get to your book. You wrote a book. It's called Duped, How Anti-Gunners Are Taking Your Freedom. And this is a perfect week for us to discuss this because a lot of people have been tricked into framing the gun control debate as, in order to have more freedom, we need less guns. And I find that annoying and insipid and ridiculous, but that is the conversation that so many Americans are having, as opposed to how can we shore up some of these really gaping holes that we have in our mental health care apparatus? How can we have the FBI and local law enforcement work together better to catch potential threats and individuals who go on to do mass shootings, et cetera, et cetera? No one wants to discuss the more difficult ways of stopping mass shootings. It's always, hey, you have AR-15s, give them to me. I want to take them. And also, I don't want to take them while I'm holding a gun. Just hand it over.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I write about in hashtag duped, and the reason why I called it hashtag duped was as a playoff of David Hogg's book, hashtag Never Again, which is essentially a ode to gun control. And you're right that at the end of the day, freedom comes from God, and for us to be able to exercise our freedom, we need to be alive. And the reality is, long before there were guns in existence, there were evil people doing bad things to good people, and good people were trying to defend themselves. And the best way to defend yourself in the modern era is having a firearm to protect yourself against the predators that are, prowling our streets, unfortunately. And you do raise an excellent point, which is, I think the Parkland school shooting is an example of that. Despite government's best efforts, the reality is government is not going to be there to protect you. I mean, in Parkland, we had an armed guard, Scott Peterson, refused to enter the building to confront the shooter, Nicholas Cruz. The shooter, Nicholas Cruz, by the way, was known by everyone as the next school shooter. The FBI was made aware of him, did nothing. The guy was almost kicked out of school like 14 or 15 times. Nothing happened. And then, of course, we have the shooting. Peterson does nothing. And then there were two unarmed security guards, one of whom, when the shooting broke out, literally hid in a closet. The other one jumped in a golf cart. How appropriate for Florida, right? Jumped in the golf cart and drove away to hide from the shooter. And then when the police do finally arrive, you have Captain Jan Jordan, who's the captain on the scene. She refuses to permit the paramedics and the fire department to go into the school to try to take care of the injured and the wounded because it was, quote unquote, too dangerous. And again, the lessons of Parkland is not that we need more gun laws. We have plenty of gun laws. It's that government, police, despite their best intentions, are often too late or too incompetent to save your life, so you better do it yourself.
Not only you better do it yourself, but you have to be prepared if you're a gun owner and you're carrying at the time to be willing to defend someone else. As that story, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, where a gentleman, he might have even been a pastor, used his gun to stop a man who was systematically running around carjacking people in a parking lot, and he'd gone into a restaurant, shot a bunch of folks, and then he was outside trying to carjack people to get away, and the guy shot him. And of course the news is not covering it at all because it's a good guy with a gun preventing more people from being killed.
That's right. And that's one of, it's interesting how I talk about in the book Duped that every year about 32 to 33,000 people a year die in automobile accidents. And the President Obama, people involved with highway safety, thought that number was really a crisis. But then I write about in Duke that the minimum number, the one that everyone agrees to, the minimum number of defensive gun uses in the United States every year is about 67,000. Some people think it's upwards of over 2 million, but everyone agrees that at least 67,000 times people use firearms to defend their own lives. That is twice the number of people that are killed in car accidents. And yet the liberals in the United States think that 35,000 people dying in car accidents is a crisis, which perhaps it is, but twice that number stay alive by virtue of guns at a minimum. And yet, of course, this positive use of guns, the defensive gun uses to keep good people alive at the hands of bad predators, just is ignored. And you're very right, Stacey, that they don't talk about this in the press. They don't want people to know that guns are good. They only want you to read about how guns are bad because the elite urban, the elite liberals in the urban areas like New York and Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, they only want you to hear one side of the story, that guns are bad, because they don't like guns. It's as simple as that. And yet they surround themselves with people with guns, of course, with their bodyguards and their metal detectors and their security. But the reality is they don't like anyone else to have guns other than their bodyguards because they can afford them.
Well, and I thought it was really funny at the NRA convention, which full disclosure, I did not make this year's NRA convention, but one of the stories that was viral on Twitter around the NRA convention was that Alyssa Milano, who's a gun control nut, showed up with armed security. And when her security guards were asked if they were carrying firearms, they said, you need to step back. In other words, we're not going to tell you what we're carrying. You need to get out of the way. So the person who was being forced away from her asked her, are your security guards armed? Because if so, how dare you have 3 or 4 guys with guns when you're advocating for no one to have guns? And she said, yeah, they're armed, but they don't have semi-automatic weapons. Well, of course they did. They were armed with handguns that are semi-automatic. No armed security carries a revolver. Like, what would be the point of that? And even if they were, it's still a gun, which totally negates her argument. But that's the kind of hypocrisy that we see from her, Rosie O'Donnell. The other one that's married to, who's married to Portia de Rossi? There's one of them that's married to Portia de Rossi. They did, Ellen DeGeneres. They did a gun control march where they had no less than 8 armed security printing surrounding them as they were joining the march. And they were only surrounded by their supporters. I don't know why they needed guns in the first place or security.
Right. And, I write about this in hashtag Duke. I actually make a long list of those celebrities that are pro-gun control, yet surround themselves with people with guns and bodyguards. I talk about Oprah. I talk about George Clooney, Michael Bloomberg. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, again, they are comfortable in a world where they get to have guns, but you don't. But most people can't afford to have bodyguards. It's a luxury that most people can't afford. So we have to be our own bodyguard. And do you remember when we were growing up, there was the old toothpaste ads that say 9 out of 10 dentists prefer Crest and things along those lines?
Yeah.
And I always say, look, forget the statistics for a moment. 100%, 10 out of 10 law enforcement agencies in the United States decide to use guns to protect themselves and the citizens that they're required to protect. Why do they have the guns? Because they know, as the professionals, that the best way to save lives is with guns. That's why there are no unarmed security agencies in the United States, because guns save lives, and they know it.
Not only that, but a lot of the deterrent activity that goes on across the country that we never hear anything about, because that's the nature of the deterrent, is that so many suburban areas are heavily armed. And so you'll see a statistic, like here in St. Louis, I remember, so we've lived here almost 20 years. And over that time, I can think of at least 12 times where I saw reports on the news that talked about how heavily armed the St. Louis County area is and how they put gun ownership at this percentage of homes own firearms. Well, that's something that the news is talking about because they're surprised that so many suburban people own firearms. But the announcement on the news acts as a deterrent for individuals to break into homes when the occupants are home. So most of the break-ins occur when they know the occupants of the home are not in the house, because we have the castle doctrine in Missouri. So if you break into a home and the homeowner is home and you are inside the house, they don't have to wait until their life is threatened to use a defensive weapon. They don't have to wait. So it acts as a deterrent to crime. Meanwhile, in the city, crime is rampant, but gun ownership there is much lower, and the Democrats control that area. So there's a lot of rigmarole that you have to go through in order to get a firearm. That's the kind of statement that you're going to hear it here on this show all the time, but you never hear it on, these progressive radio programs or any of the normal television shows. They don't connect those things up for people. The reason there's less crime out there is obviously there's more money, less socioeconomic disadvantage, but there's also more gun ownership. It baffles my mind because it could save more lives.
You're right. And, Stacey, you make an excellent point about burglaries. There's 2 types of burglaries in the world. There's cold burglaries where you try to break into a person's home but no one's home. And then there are hot burglaries where people try to burgle the home when there's people home. And, in places like the United Kingdom where you have really no private ownership of guns at the end of the day, you find that almost all the burglaries are actually hot burglaries because people don't care if you're home because there's nothing you can do to them because you're not going to have a gun to shoot them. So you have this very dangerous situation where you have criminals breaking into the home and you might actually be there with your family. And that is very dangerous, of course. But in the United States, where you have private ownership of guns, you find a lot fewer hot burglaries in this country, especially in the red states where you're allowed to have guns, unlike, let's say, maybe New York City. It's a big difference, and I think you raise an excellent point about that in your commentary, Stacey.
I'm just glad you're out there writing this stuff. I shared in the different live streams, I put the link up from A.W.R. Hawkins' article about your book, and he connects up a lot of the points that we've made today. I put that in there. I encourage people to get the book and understand how it's a freedom issue. It's the perfect time to discuss it. The 4th of July weekend, we're celebrating our birthday as a nation. We are one of the last few nations on the planet who we believe in individual liberty so much that we train people to want to defend themselves, and then we allow our citizenry their right to self-defense by owning a gun. It's a great time for us to reacquaint ourselves with not just the Second Amendment, but why, and your book does a great job of doing that. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Stacey. Always a pleasure.
All right. Talk to you again soon. Mark W. Smith, constitutional lawyer, author of Duped, #Duped, how anti-gunners are taking your freedom. We are going to have, in the last segment, we're going to hear some audio from President Trump on free trade. This is about more than just the tariffs. The tariffs that's the meat on the bone, but there's side dishes galore in this fight over tariffs and intellectual property and American sovereignty. It's all connected. So we'll talk about that. And we'll take your calls, 866-963-2037. Stacey on the Right.
Here's what you missed on Airing the Addisons.
I'll say this. What I think needs to happen is I think the husband needs to, never in front of anybody, because an audience always escalates the situation. It could be something real simple that the two of you have discussed before, but when you've got eyes, a second set of eyes, I don't care who it is, right? It always escalates the situation. And you could say something the way you would always say it, always talk about it, but one element different, just having one person, now it's a performance. You see what I'm saying? And so you always want to make sure that you don't do that. And so I think if, speaking as a wife, I want to know as close to that moment as possible in a way that protects my feelings that I have injured you.
Tune in weekday mornings, 6 to 9 Central on Urban Family Talk.
It's time to call your senators. We need to tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Senators respond to constituent calls. So call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
Just as David's mighty man Benaiah chased down a lion into a pit on a snowy day, Lion Chasers champions uncommon men and women of faith who are unafraid to stand up and speak truth to power in these dark and evil days. Never before has there been such a need for people of faith to draw a line in the sand with the sword of truth. Lion Chasers, the intersection of faith and public policy with Lonnie Poindexter. Weekday mornings at 10 Central on Urban Family Talk.
This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. Turn on the news any time of day and stories of victimization flow. Every demographic group, every segment of society is a victim. Instead of seeing ourselves as righteous and forgiven, made right with God through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, we believe the noise and accept a victim's mentality. Victims cannot accomplish goals or persevere through life's trials and tribulations. The New Testament is replete with verses about who we are in Christ. Guess what? You are not a victim. You are a victorious child of God. You are a branch of the true vine and a conduit of Christ's life. Jesus calls you friend. You are justified and redeemed. You are free from condemnation and set free from the law of sin and death. You are God's workmanship, created to produce good works. You are accepted, redeemed, and you can do all things through Christ, who is our strength. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
Welcome back to Stacey on the Right.
We are demanding from foreign countries, friend and foe, fair and reciprocal trade. We have been very much taken advantage of as a country. We've lost our companies. We've lost our jobs. They build a product, they send it in. That's why this is so beautiful, because this is as great as there is anywhere in the world, and we do it within our country.
Mm-hmm. We do. And welcome back to the show. Stacey Washington, host of Stacey on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. We are so excited. Monday, it's the first day of an entire week of celebration for the July 4th weekend, which happens to fall in the middle of the week this year, but that's okay. We can still have a great time. And I'm pumped about it. You know, we have to be grateful. One of my favorites is Dance with the One Who Brought Ya. You got to know who buttered that toast, right? Who buttered the toast? Is it the Russians or the Brits, or is it the Canadians, or is it Americans? Is it America? Is it a God-given constitution, a country founded on Judeo-Christian principles, a place that, with all of our flaws, and we got potholes, and we have racists, and we have thieves and murderers, and we have drunkards, and, you know, we have our fair share of every part of mayhem that you can think of. But we also have freedom and liberty, religious freedom, and we have the right to protect ourselves. We have the right to freely assemble. We have the right to speak our minds and to address our government officials. We have the right to seek legal redress against those who've harmed us. We have the right to be innocent until proven guilty. We have a lot to be grateful for. And if you just wonder, just think of people who live in countries where not only is there not enough, their government makes it so that even when there is enough, there's not enough. That's North Korea, where one of their top generals gave extra food to his troops, and Kim Jong-un had him executed for giving out food. Yeah. Now imagine that situation in the United States military, where every day, our military throws food away that soldiers don't eat, and airmen and so on and so forth in our chow halls and mess halls and dining facilities. If you want to know good eating, just go to a military base and get signed on and go to the O Club, the Officers Club. Seafood. Oh, it's magnificent. And on Thanksgiving, on the holidays, they just show up and show out for those troops to make sure that they feel loved and wanted and appreciated on the holidays, because they're not home with their families. There's just so much about our country to be grateful for. And I say that as someone, I've experienced racism. I've experienced all kinds of hardships. I've had some pretty interesting interactions with our medical apparatus here in this country, and I still would rather be here, and I'd rather it be America. And I've also been all over the world. I've been to Russia back when it was the USSR. I'll never forget riding on the train out of Moscow. We were headed to what was then known as St. Petersburg. And as we got further and further outside of Moscow, everything just kind of turned to gray, because Moscow is a very colorful city, and it's their flagship city. It's the city that's the capital of their tourism, and many, many people fly in there. And this is back when it was still obviously USSR. It was still a communist country. It was before the fall of communism. And I'm traveling through there as a kid, as a teenager. And we're on the charter bus headed towards the train station. And then we get to the train station, we get on the train. And as we travel further and further outside of Moscow, there are still, obviously kind of like suburban areas, but there's not a lot of color there. And I just remember thinking, why is the city so colorful? And, but as we get further out, it just looks so bleak. Communism. I mean, and there's so many examples of that around the world. And there are great countries that practice socialism. There are. And there's no doubt about it that Canada is a beautiful country and that they have, very capitalistic bent, and it's a great place to live. Plenty of Americans live as expats in Canada. But that's not the point, is it? The point is, would that work for us? And there's something to be said about who we are. We're Americans. So there's a difference in the way we think, the way we perceive things, the way we absorb information, the way we tackle problems, and what we know to be our rights. And so citizens in countries that don't have those rights don't think of themselves in the same way, and they don't think of their rights in the same way. We think of our rights in a way that it's unmistakable. And the reason you want verification of that, read the articles about the illegal immigrants who get deported back to Mexico and how they're shocked by the corruption and the graft, and you have to bribe government officials. Nobody works for the government and does their job just because it's their job and they get paid to do it. Everyone works for bribes. And that there's no right to an education. There's no right to any, like here in America, we get so offended. It's like, I've been in line at Starbucks for 8 minutes. And you're like, so I'm not leaving. I need my Starbucks. I'm just to stay here. Earlier today, our daughter was out doing something and she texted me and said, I'm on the way home. I'm like, oh my goodness, pick me up some Caldies. You guys, if you're new to the show, I have an addiction to this Caldies coffee. It's so good. It's everything you need in life. And no offense to Starbucks, because we still drink Starbucks because we have an 18-year-old. And if you don't have an 18-year-old who's about to go to college, then you can't sympathize with me. But whatever your 18-year-old likes, you like, because you want to spend every minute with them. And so she loves Starbucks, so we do still go there, but through the drive-through, because I can't stand going into places that try to tell me whether or not I have the right to carry a firearm. I'm not going to put up with that. But the drive-through still works. But for me, when I have a choice, I love to go to Caldi's. And so she went, and she was there in line for, she said, almost 20 minutes. It was really busy today. And it might be because it was warm outside and you can get your coffee iced or blended. And so people were in there doing that. And she was there around the lunchtime. So she was there during the crush. But she waited and she got me 2 coffees and came home with them. And it was really great to have some Caldi's, because I'm telling you, every time I've been out recently over the past 3 months or so, it's been with our 18-year-old. And so she's been dominating. She's been like, Mom, I need coffee. And so we go to Starbucks. And I don't love their burnt coffee. So I want Caldi's. So I was having some of that today. But we just feel like, we're so entitled. We're so used to our freedoms. And in some ways, that is as it should be. I mean, if you've ever had, a moment where you realize that your kids or your spouse, they're kind of spoiled, maybe your spouse is complaining about something they're eating. This doesn't taste the way it's supposed to. And then you realize, the reason they don't think that tastes right is because they're used to the way you cook it. And then you're kind of like, well, that's as it should be because I make it fantastic. And that's kind of how it is for us Americans. We're spoiled, but it's as it should be because our country's fantastic. And for all of the problems that we have in the past been able to address them with solutions. But right now we're watching the Democrats reap what they've sown with they've been in a love affair with socialism for at least 20 years, possibly longer. And the more they've danced with it, the better it's felt. At first, they were just, every now and again, they'd touch fingers or do a high five. And then it was, we're dancing arm in arm, but we're, now they're dancing. They're not just slow dancing. They're twerking with socialism. And they're surprised that they're catching things. They've got socialism crabs and everything else going on. And what do they get out of it besides lots of shots and trips to the doctor? They're losing. So if they run someone, so what happens is they move further and further to the left. In response to Americans rejecting leftism, they move further and further to the left. It's like they're saying, they're not rejecting us because we're too far to the left. They're rejecting us because we're not leftist enough. Well, now they've run up against the brick wall of socialism, and the brick wall has spikes coming out of it. And every time they touch it, they get pricked, and they're like, ow, that hurts. But instead of running away from it, they're like, well, there must be someplace else we can go. Now, and what are those pricks? The pricks are these socialists. They're young. They talk a good game. They're liars, but I mean, who cares? If you believe in socialism, you're ready for the lies. You want the lies. You're like, give me more lies. I need lies. These candidates are now not just pricking, but they're literally obliterating the Democrats they're getting pushed up against the socialist wall. So what do they have to do? They're going to have to climb that wall and get on the other side of it. And on the other side is communism. And anyone who doesn't like communism, in communist countries, they just kill you for disagreeing. But here in America, we still have, 400 million, 600 million guns, a bunch of Americans who not only do they not like big cities, they don't like the ideas that come out of the big cities. There's still at least enough of those people to make the idea that this little 28-year-old Ortiz, that she can force this down the throats of Americans. It's not happening. So they'll keep dancing with it. Remember in the 70s, they were bombing places. They were putting, incendiary devices around and bombing and doing all this violent activity because they weren't getting their way. They're raising the level of rhetoric to that same kind of fever pitch right now. Donald Trump just isn't someone that they oppose. He's a terrorist. He's kidnapping children. This was all going on during the Obama administration. They never said anything. Now, never mind that he's reversed the policy and he's calmed everything down, and they're trying like the Dickens to handle the onslaught. It's not good enough because it's not about those kids. Remember when I told you that the fight over immigration and the DACA recipients wasn't about the DACA recipients? And then Donald Trump made the Democrats admit that it wasn't about the DACA recipients? Remember, he said, I'll give not just the 800,000 amnesty. I'll give 1.8 million of them amnesty. Then he upped it from there and said he'd give 3.6 million potential DACA recipients, dreamers, and anyone else who missed the deadlines to apply. All of them would get a pathway to citizenship. All the Democrats had to do was agree to end chain migration and go to a merit-based system. If it was about the DACA recipients, they would have said yes. They would have said, oh my goodness, I can't believe this demon Donald Trump is giving us what we want, but we better take it while the iron is hot because we care about these DACA recipients and we want them to be safe and free from the threat of deportation. When's the last time you heard anything about DACA recipients from a Democrat? Yeah, that silence is you haven't. You're not going to. Because they've moved on. They no longer care about the DACA recipients because they couldn't get what they wanted out of supporting them. Now they care about the children at the border. If Donald Trump, he already has, the Republicans already proposed, we give not only the DACA recipients get amnesty, but we're going to stop separating kids at the border, but we want the end to chain migration and mandatory E-Verify. And the Democrats blinked again. How many more examples do we as Americans need before we realize that these people, none of the individuals they claim to care so much about do they care about? They don't care about people who've been killed with gun violence. They don't care about DACA recipients. They don't care about dreamers. They don't care about the children at the border. They're talking about it because they feel like it will be something that will motivate their voters to prevent a red wave. Remember, they thought by now, if the Democratic playbook worked, well, first of all, none of this would be happening because Hillary Clinton would be president. But in the absence of a Hillary Clinton presidency, right now where they're supposed to be on their timeline is Donald Trump should be experiencing impeachment hearings. The Republicans should be on the ropes. They're defending their party. They're defending the president. He looks like he's going to be kicked out. In order to get rid of the problem that they have with this man sitting up there on TV every day in these open Senate hearings, answering all these questions about extramarital affairs and collusion with Russians, that they would impeach him and get rid of him, and then Mike Pence would be the president. But in the process, they would lose the House, they would lose the Senate, because Americans would be so ticked off at this president and his party. That's what's supposed to be happening right now. Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, all of those individuals, Jim Comey, they all set this thing up so that they could bring about that result. But instead, booming economy, near full employment, all kinds of discussion about a possibility, which, I mean, obviously it was never a sure thing, but some kind of normalized relations with Korea, tax reform. I mean, there's just all these discussions going on. Americans are really just paying attention to their wallets and their investments and their opportunities, scheduling vacations, getting together, doing things with their extended family. They're not thinking about impeaching Donald Trump. And I don't care how many times Chuck Todd says that President Trump is unpopular. It doesn't mean that he's unpopular enough that Americans want to see him removed from office. Even Democrats who dislike the president, I'm talking regular people, aren't interested in seeing him impeached and starting over with our government. And that's why you hear this rhetoric. That's why we now need bodies on the line. We need people to be ready to die. Because their timeline is not just messed up. It's like they're afraid they're in an alternative universe. And the only way out is to get crazier and crazier and crazier. We have to pray that they don't succeed. We have to pray that these people are going to be thwarted, not allowed to do what they've tried to do. All right. That's the show for today. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Happy week of the 4th of July, and God bless.